Hello and a very warm welcome to Middle East Matters. I'm Sanam Shantier. Coming up on our programme this week, after 6 days stuck in the Suez Canal, a massive vessel called the Evergreen is finally free. The incident prevented travel through one of the world's busiest shipping corridors. Plus, one conflict, two perspectives. I'll be speaking to Syrian writer Rana Haddad and war reporter Alfred de Montesquiou, both authors trying to show life through more than just the prism of war. Now, for 6 days, a 400-metre-long container ship blocked traffic in the Suez Canal, disrupting 10% of global shipping traffic. France 24's Delano de Souza takes a look at how the vessel was freed and the lingering consequences of this blockade.
After being choked for 6 days, global trade across the Suez Canal moving once again. The saga began last Tuesday when a sandstorm across one of the most vital maritime arteries in the world lodged the Ever Given vessel. At first, a gust of wind was believed to be the reason for wedging the ship diagonally across the canal. But Egyptian authorities say a full investigation is needed to determine if technical or human errors occurred.
We didn't hope for something like this, but as fate would have it, it showed and reaffirmed the reality and importance of the Suez Canal.
Each day, the Ever Given blocked the canal. An estimated $9.6 billion worth of global trade was held up. Salvage teams worked tirelessly around the clock to collect mud and sand from around the vessel in order to refloat the ship. Over the weekend, tugboats pushed and pulled the Ever Given at high tide to try dislodge it. The breakthrough came on Monday morning, followed by a promising statement from Egyptian authorities that the vessel had been refloated. The Suez Canal provides the shortest sea link between Asia and Europe. The alternative and longer route around the Cape of Good Hope can add over a week in additional travel time.
422 ships were held up and none of them thought of taking an alternative route, despite the canal being stopped for 6 days. If they saw an alternative, they would have used it.
Around a tenth of the world's cargo passes through the Suez Canal. That's more than 18,500 ships a year and 1.2 billion net tons of cargo. The brief crisis in the Suez Canal is estimated to have cost Egypt up to $90 million in lost revenue.
To Syria now, a country often seen through the lens of conflict. The reason for this: a decade into the war, the crisis remains a living nightmare for Syrians in and out of the country. And so many are craving a break from the constant stream of negative news. Two authors are trying to do just that, albeit from very different perspectives. I'd like to welcome them to Middle East Matters now. Rana Haddad and Alfred de Montesquiou, thank you both so much for being with us. Rana, let's start with you. Why don't you tell us about yourself and, of course, your amazing book, The Unexpected Love Objects of Dunya Noor.
Hello, Sanam. Very nice to be here with you. So I'm a writer and a journalist. I was born and grew up in Syria, and then I lived in England, where I worked as a journalist. This book is set in the last few decades of the 20th century, and it's about a girl who's very cheeky and has a very big mouth and does whatever she wants to do against all expectations, and the consequences of that. In Syria at that time. And that's it.
Alfred, what about you? You've just published L'Étoile des Frontières, which is the border star. Tell us about that.
Hi, Sanan. Thanks for having me. Yeah, L'Étoile des Frontières is my first novel. I'm a reporter by trade. I was a war correspondent for a long while at the AP and then at Paris Match. And the idea of this novel is to describe a little bit what it feels like to be behind the lines with a rebellion, with the revolutionary groups in Syria in 2011, 12, 13, while it was still possible for reporters like myself to be there before a lot of the movement was overcome by ISIS.
So as I said, very different perspectives there. Rana, I do want to talk about the tone of your book. It's so different to many pieces that I've read in the past linked to Syria. It's peppered, if I can say that, with satire, with comic moments.
Yes, the tone of the book actually reflects the way I experience Syria and the way many, many Syrians experience Syria. But it's not usually reflected in literature. That's especially not literature that's translated to English. But it's very much reflected in the country if you're there. And of course, not during the war itself, but in general. So the book gives you a big picture about the tone, the mood, the personality of the country, the way people communicate and speak. And I use that
and it's wonderfully funny. Alfred, of course, Rana just said she's coming from a look inside the country, whereas you, as a war reporter, you're coming from a very different angle. This is how you described it to me. This is by no means an insider book about Syria, if you like.
No, it isn't. It's in a sense it's an adventure book, and it tries to give a little bit of that sense of adventure. It's called Border Star, and the book begins in Lebanon, in fact, and it describes the process of crossing illegally through the mountains, through the landmines, through the patrols from Hezbollah and the Bashar army to reach the rebellion. It tries to give a little bit of the feeling of what it's like to be within a revolutionary movement, but with the assumption that it's the eye of an outsider looking at the Syrians.
So you both, if I can say that, you both have a mission. I want to talk about Rana's mission first. Rana, you want the reader to understand that there is so much more to this extraordinary country than just war, not just through the book, but through conversations that you have about Syria.
Yes, certainly. It's quite, as a Syrian, and not just me, but many, many Syrians that I know who live in the West especially, feel that their country is being described in a very kind of mono-narrative. People only know about the war and see the country as a victim. Before the war, Syria was out under the radar, so nobody knew anything about it before, and now they only hear about the war. So I feel, and many other people feel that, we want people to see Syria in a bigger, broader perspective. It's a beautiful country, and it's, people there are just normal. They're like everyone else. They have a sense of humor. They fall in love. There's an amazing culture there. And also the other thing that's very important for me is many, many countries, including the UK, France, Japan, have had terrible wars. Cities have been flattened all over the world throughout history. And at the moment, this is happening in Syria. It's a terrible, terrible chapter, but I don't think the country should be defined through that chapter.
And that's why you often talk about the culture, the heritage, the colors. Now, Alfred, you're also, in your own way, you're pushing the boundaries. But yours is more about what we can call maybe a hijacked narrative. Do you agree with that?
Yes, I'd agree with that. I wanted to bounce off on what Rana was saying. Obviously, Syria is a fascinating and beautiful country, which I love, and I used to travel to also before the war. But this novel is about exactly that, the hijacked narrative, which is, in a sense, since the revolution began, Bashar al-Assad and his regime have said that these were scoundrels and that the upheaval was, essentially preparing the terrain for a jihadi civil war and ISIS and so on. The point of my book is to show that, in fact, the pro-democracy activists who started walking in the streets in early 2011 and were people who were just, asking for civil rights. They were educated, smart, pro-Western in many cases people, and they wanted to have a taste of the freedom that the Arab world was beginning to discover, in part thanks to the Arab Spring. And the book tries to describe these people, the hope of these people, and actually also their courage, which is the point where they're being chased by the Mukhabarat and the army, and they realize that the only way for them to defend their ideal and to defend themselves is to fight, because they're pushed into fighting. They don't have any other choice. But the novel it goes through that period of time.
Alfred, it's wonderful that you speak about this sense of hope and courage, because Rana, I want to end with you. You've spoken before and you've said that you relate to the words of feminist author Chimamanda Adichie because there are dangers to telling a single story, aren't there?
Yes, I think that, telling a single story about certain cultures, not only Syria, but often the Middle East, and at the moment Syria is in the headlight, is very, very dangerous in general. Because if the people in the West will think that everyone there is a particular way when they're not, And if you are, let's say, a Syrian refugee who comes to the West, or an immigrant or whatever, you feel alienated from what's being said about you. The way people see you is not the way you see yourself. And this creates a huge mismatch in perspective, in narrative. And I think that's dehumanizing and also can cause a lot of problems. So we should be more diverse in our storytelling, I think.
And here we are together trying to look at the different facets of Syria. Alfred, I want to end with you. This is a burning question from me. You know, as a reporter, looking at the work, the incredible work that you've done over the past years, why not opt for a non-fiction? Because I guess that was potentially what would have been expected from you.
Thanks. That's really a key question for me. And I've written several books that are non-fictions. I've written, like you, I've been a reporter for a long time. The problem, I realized that at a certain point there's a limit to what journalism can do and can say, and the limit obviously is intimacy. And if you want to go into the reveal a little bit of the soul of the people you like and you admire, if you want to nuance their feelings, at a certain point, it's as if fiction gave you new tools to explore a certain truth. So I'm not writing a fiction to invent something, that happens in another galaxy or in another time period. I'm using fiction to try to dig or to take a closer, more subtle look at things at people I believe in and at things I believe in.
Alfred de Montesquiou, Rana, Haddad, I'd love to keep going, but we have to end it there. Thank you both so much for being with us and looking with me at the different faces of Syria. Thank you so much, and thank you all for watching Middle East Matters.